Which spirit, animal, or bird best describes you and your approach?
I might cheat a little bit on this one. I'm going to say,
Is that kind of the main operating principle in your life? Like, even if you can have fewer resources and you can be down a score, but you're still in the game.
and eventually kind of get to what was eventually always going to be the goal of starting something of my own, being an entrepreneur. So
Hello and welcome back to the Masters of Real Estate. This is Nick Shah. Today, we are going to learn from Spondon Hazarika. Spondon, how's it going, buddy?
it's going well. How are you, Nick?
Good, good. Where are you joining us from?
I'm okay just outside the Boston area.
Oh, New England. I've spent some time there. So, Spondon, how do you introduce yourself these days?
Spondon Hazarika. I'm the CEO of Green Ivy Ventures. We're an early stage technology company focused on developing products and solutions. And the way I kind of position it up, our mission and our vision is to make every day extraordinary through everyday solutions that simplify life, delight, and solve real problems. So currently, we're really focused on the real estate space, and there's a lot of fun problems to take a look at and try to solve there. And then, who knows where we go from there? We'll figure it out as the cards show themselves.
Everyday solutions that simplify light, delight, and solve problems. I love that. I love that in real estate. And seems like you've had quite a journey in real estate. But before we get into all that, people want to understand what you're really like, Spondon. So, which spirit, animal, or bird best describes you and your approach?
I might cheat a little bit on this one. I'm going to say the underdog. And the reason I say that it's cheating is because it's actually the first cultural value that we have at Green Ivy Ventures. And it's the one that's most important to me. So for context, I absolutely love dogs. I'll see a massive 150-pound dog on the other side of the street and be like, that's a cute puppy. I want to go pet it. But something about that underdog spirit, I think, has always been something that I've really enjoyed and embodied, and never been a big fan of like, here's how the absolute best way to go do something is. I think I've maybe had a slightly contrarian view to things a lot of times. And I think it served me well in my career for a lot of what I've done. So I think the underdog is definitely a good part of the spirit animal. It's not a real animal, but I think it embodies very much how I try to show up and how I ask my team.
I love that. I love that. Is that kind of the main operating principle in your life? Like, even if you can have fewer resources and you can be down a score, but you're still in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest operating principle is that there's really no shortcut to hard work. You can choose to be smart, choose to do smart work, but it's hard work at the end of the day. There really is no shortcutting it. And a big part of that, I subscribe to the idea of consistency. I think there's a great book by James Clear called Atomic Habits, which talks about the idea of being 1% better than yesterday, and 1%, 1%, 1% compounds and becomes, something magnificent towards the end of it. Very much the Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger kind of theory about things as well. Small changes lead to changes in the longer term. So I kind of believe in that philosophy, and that's kind of how I tend to push myself and my team as well. So the operating principle is consistency and showing up and being there. Those are the two biggest things.
Just show up, be there, get better every day. And there's no shortcut to all of that. Completely agree. If you had to select a single metric, Spondon, to summarize your entire professional journey so far, what would you say that is?
It's a fun one. So I think I love to hang my hat on the idea of product and product innovation. I consider myself a specialist in that area. I think I've done about 25 or 26 products over the course of 18 years. So it's been a lot of fun. And some of them are very early stage little things that die relatively quickly on the vine. And other are, large scale products that end up being 400, 500 products. So I've kind of run the gamut of different types of products out there. But definitely the jumping from one product to the other and kind of going with the ones that work and killing off the ones that I can bring to the table.
Wow. Yeah. Over 25 products over the last 18 years. Sounds amazing, Spondon. But let's go back all the way to the start when you had not launched all these products and seen the kind of success you've seen, which some products being over 400 million plus run rate. When you look back at your past, what's been your broad trajectory so far?
Sure. So I was trained classically as an electrical engineer, and I was really astounded by the change in the change that mobile devices brought to the world. And I thought that's the world I wanted to help shape. That's the thing I wanted to go and do. So I started off in the telco space, but at the same time, I think I also like to diversify what I like to work on, and my brain is always active and always. So I ended up building a solar car when I was in college as well. So I ended up building an array that basically it was on top of a car that the team took to Australia, raced for 3,000 kilometers against other teams. And I think we placed first in Canada and fifth in the world that year. So it was one of the best showings that we had. So it was really cool because I was able to kind of classically educate myself on kind of the core engineering principles of mobility and wireless stuff, but I was also able to sort of self-teach, very hardware-based concepts. So I created something like solar cells, which I found fascinating as well at the time. And it was a big car guy at the time as well, so I was a big passion to kind of blend those things together. So that was kind of like my first foray into what I didn't really know at the time was basically product management. It was the idea of taking an engineering product and building something, with a timeline, a budget, a team, and being very careful about how you make decisions, what you say yes, no to as well. So that kind of got me into that mindset of building projects and products. That kind of eventually led me into sort of the product management product.
Fascinating. And, so from building a solar car in college, it seems like you worked in telecom initially. You were there when research in motion, commonly known as BlackBerry across the world, was at some of its highest peaks, right? Before iPhone took over its market share. What were some of the highs and lows of going through that market cycle?
It's funny. I think the highs and lows probably came within a month of each other. I think the highs were I was on the teams that helped launch the BlackBerry Pearl and the Curve. I don't know if you remember the ones with the little trackballs that were on there. So it was fascinating watching, this phenom of a product, the BlackBerry, go into something that was out of the enterprise and business world into the consumer world and be like, wow, this is about to take off. Stocks are taking off. They were building buildings left, right, and center. And I think maybe a month or two after that launch, we ended up seeing the Steve Jobs address with the iPhone. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is not good. This is not going to be great. So the low came pretty quickly after that. And unfortunately, the company, I think they managed to rectify the ship in many ways and try to find the nation salvage what they needed to. But it was very sad to kind of see, especially a great Canadian company, kind of rise so quickly, and then it takes such a massive fall. So a quick reminder that you can't ever rest on your laurels, no matter where you're at. There's always competition out there, which is a good thing for the consumer, but very tricky if you're trying to run it.
Yeah, never rest on your laurels, indeed. And it seems like, you took that and transitioned from telecom to consulting for a few years. So what motivated you to transition to, consulting overall?
So I don't know that I fit the typical mold of an engineer sometimes is what I felt. Despite, how some people might perceive me, I'm actually a massive introvert. I don't necessarily like to spend time in very big social situations. I really enjoy these kind of personal interactions and one-on-one conversations. And I learned a lot from that. But I realized that for me, it felt like that skill was lacking and my business sense was really lacking. And I felt like I could come back to the engineering side of things. I think I've got the fortitude and capacity for it if I ever needed to come back to it. So when I discovered the world of management consulting, it seemed like a really interesting opportunity to be able to take, the technical acumen and build business acumen and eventually kind of get to what was eventually always going to be the goal of starting something on my own, being an entrepreneur. So I think it offered a path to a place that I didn't know existed before. And when I found it, I said, that was going to be a great option to blend the experiences and the interest that I had towards a vision that I had.
And then what motivated you to leverage the tremendous experience you had in consulting to get into product initially, back into telecom product, and then eventually into real estate product as well?
Completely by accident? Is that an acceptable answer?
What's the story behind that?
I feel like this happens a lot whenever I kind of mentor product people that want to break into product management. They say, how'd you get in? And it ends up being, you kind of have to know somebody or kind of get into an adjacency. So what ended up happening is that I was very focused at the time on building my career in the wireless and mobility space. And I had this big vision of how I was going to change that entire industry. And as luck would have it, I ended up getting staffed on a project that was kind of unrelated to that. And, I did what I could to help out the firm and be a good consultant. And I finally got my shot to get back into that wireless world. And I got a call, I think like a week before saying, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to pull you back in. It was one of the partners. He called me. I had to pull you back into this other world. And I was very upset about it. But it ended up being the best thing that ended up happening because I actually got staffed onto product as the product manager for that and kind of discovered accidentally what product management. And, credit to the team that, saw this in me and gave me the opportunity for it. It was a perfect fit in terms of the skill set and what I really wanted to do. And that was my aha moment. I realized this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to build products. So very accidental. And it just so happened that it was a role that I think once sort of my passion and interest sort of shone through, it became very easy to kind of keep repeating that and kind of just gobbling up every framework I could find, learning as much as I could about that space and realizing that's what I wanted to get done. And I finally realized I wanted to get out of the consulting space, not hop onto a plane every Monday morning. And product management seemed like a great way to kind of continue on with the experience and interest that I had. And I took a full-time gig working at Verizon Innovation Lab shortly after that to be really dive into innovation and product.
And how did your, tremendous experience at Verizon, building products for Verizon, influence your next role and building products for real estate brokerage at EXP?
So when I was at Verizon, again, very accidental. The first product I was brought in for got killed, I think, in the first month because of market forces. So nothing that I had done at the point. It just ended up being the case where wrong place, wrong time. It turns out that because of the consulting experience that I had, I did a pretty okay job, I guess, hopping from one product to another and bringing in sort of consultative value to be able to figure out business cases, to be able to figure out go-to-market strategies, customer success strategies, starting beta trials and getting the initial product kind of off the ground with the team and so on and so forth. That's a lot of how sort of my roles at different teams sort of came to be and kind of like getting those out to market. And the transition to real estate happened, I think, because of a realization that my career wasn't exactly going where I thought it was going to be going in terms of being this wireless guy that was going to go and change the world. And I also kind of got to the point where I couldn't really describe why it was fun to talk about dollars per gigabyte for cloud storage as a business case. It wasn't really relevant. So I was looking for something a little more relevant. And one of the things that, I really found fascinating in my background, my history, was I moved a lot, actually. So I lived in 4 countries, 19 cities, 13 schools, 32 homes. And I had a very atypical upbringing from that perspective. So because of that, I never really had a place to call home for until very, very recently. So that process of like discovering what home is and figuring out where your roots are and how to pick a place to go live and what matters for you and your life and your lifestyle, that really started to kind of speak to me as that became part of the personal journey. And I realized like, this is the industry I think I really want to be a part of and I want to get more involved in. So I started an idea for a startup back in like 2018. And, because of my innovation background, I decided it wasn't a good idea to go build anything. So all I had was a pitch deck and I went around from place to place talking about this concept and it tested really well. And I learned very quickly that it was a good idea conceptually, but there was too many regulatory issues to deal with. So because of that, the risks were unsurmountable for me. Go kill that one. So another feather to put in the cap, so to speak. So I think that was kind of my first foray into real estate. And then this is while I was still doing some of the work at the Verizon at the Innovation Labs. And at the time during COVID, an opportunity came along from a brokerage, eXp Realty, to come join them in rebuilding their consumer platform. And I kind of said, the stars are just aligning here. I can't write the script any better for myself. And it was a great team to work with. So I really bit into the opportunity as soon as I could.
Fascinating. So it seems like you've also experienced a lot of cultures, living in 4 countries, 19 cities, 32 homes. What about those experiences really influence your ability to empathize with end users on the product and the journey they take on while using?
I think a big part of that was the realization that my experience is not everybody else's. So in order for me to understand everybody else's experiences, I had to ask questions. I had to not make assumptions about, this is how I live my life. This must be how everybody else lives their life. So anytime I had an opportunity to kind of talk to people about something like real estate, whether someone's thinking about finding a new place to live, rent or buy, whatever it might be. I spent a lot of time sort of digging into, well, where are they now? Where are they going? What matters to them? So it became one of those things where hopefully I wasn't too boring at parties, but it got really fun and interesting for me to be able to talk to people, understand like what made them tick and what made them happy and brought them joy and what they prioritized in their life. And I realized that the gamut is extreme. It could be very different. And one of the most fascinating things also is I think once you start to make decisions for real estate that are not just based on you, there are other people that are involved in the transaction as well. There's your spouse, there could be your kids, there could be another generation of family, parents, you have cousins that might be nearby. Those are all factors that can go into deciding where you want to go and live, or they may completely not be factors if you're moving somewhere else for just a job or something like that. So it was one of the most fascinating things to me is that I could never ask the same question twice and get the same answer twice.
Fascinating. And Spondon, when you ask questions to so many end users and think about their varied experiences in life and how they make decisions, especially with something like real estate, how do you cut through all the noise to figure out, what are the common characteristics or traits to finally add into the product?
I think a big part of it is just going out there and starting the first few conversations and not knowing where it's going to end up, with everything else I've done being very iterative with it. So the first few conversations for me tend to be about setting the baseline of, I don't really know what I don't at this point, so let me just ask some general questions. And my line of questioning of customer interview tends to be a lot more about, tell me day to day, what does life look like? How, what do you do? What do you focus on? Tell me about your family and so on and so forth, whatever it might be, what's important to you, and really help paint a picture of what they are focused on. And it can also vary from market to market. So a big part of that is making sure when you do your customer research to be focused particularly in certain areas and try to kind of figure out if there's common patterns. The baseline gets you that framework of, here's what I think my initial set of hypotheses is. And one of the things that I kind of learned over time is that if you do about 10 customer interviews or 20 customer interviews, within the first like 5 to 7, you get a pretty good directional trend of how the rest of the answers are going to go. So at that point, you have something to kind of, like I said, set that baseline framework for, to say, this is what I think the baseline is going to be. And if we want to create a product that's going to help solve a pain point or a problem, these are the things that we've heard that are relatively common so far. So if you pick one of those, now pick a problem to go and solve, what are kind of the solutions that start to make a little bit of sense? So if you can come back to that customer or find other customers later on that sort of match a similar profile, now it's sort of doing the baseline kind of interview and question about what you feel like you probably already know. You can do a faster version of that. You can start to zero in on what you feel you've heard as a repeatable problem set and kind of start to talk about, what are some of the ways that you try to solve those, understand how they try to solve them, and figure out whether or not your solution is actually differentiating or solving the problem in a way that is measurably better or not. And sometimes you end up, it's a product demos, and there's a prototypes, and you try to get some feedback and build a beta tester community. So that's a big part of it. But I'd say the main thing is having the framework and the baseline in place, and then iterating on top of that as you kind of figure out which pain points or problems to try to solve.
Fascinating. Yeah, first build a baseline and then, launch something that solves common issues and then keep it iterating till you find a better delight from customer. If you had to think about product managers as overall set, what do you feel is the biggest difference between somebody who is really good at product management versus somebody who is really great at product management?
That's a super interesting question. I think the people that are really great at product management, I think there's a few characteristics that are pretty common. So I think off the top of my head, what I tend to see are, first of all, people that are really great at product management are usually extremely good empaths. They're able to empathize with other people's perspectives and not necessarily come in and say, like, this is the way it has to be done. It's that idea of having strong opinions held loosely and willing to change your perspective if the data or the interview or customer information turns out to be different than what they did. The second is someone who tends to be pretty well-read and all-rounded. Some of the best product managers I've ever met are people that I am astounded by, because I don't know how you know so many things. That I don't know how you produce more hours in the day to understand all the things that you do. and have the context. So it's being able to have this very broad, sweeping, cross-functional view of things, whether it's the strategy side of things, the technology side of things, and finding that balance in between, which I think the third characteristic is that sometimes you have to kind of make a decision, even if it may be unpopular, and say, this is how we have to do it right now, and these are the reasons why, and being able to lean on that empath aspect of it, and being able to talk to your team about these are the reasons why. And if that doesn't work out, we go back and try this decision next, and be able to lay out a framework or strategy of how things go. So I'd say the very last thing that kind of is leaning to there is the systemic thinking, rather, is to be able to think in terms of systems of, if A does this and B does this, how do their interdependencies work? And what happens when this changes over here? What are the risks over here? What are the benefits over here? So that idea of being able to almost see around a corner is something that I found I've really respected in some of the best product managers.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Have really strong empathy for your end users, be really well read, all rounded, and then be able to understand the broader system as to how changing one thing will influence others in the system by seeing around the corners. Seems like you've had quite a career trajectory, right? From being an electrical engineer and building a solar car 18 years ago when you were just in college, to working in telecom, working in consulting, working in product development, working in real estate. How did your upbringing influence your career trajectory overall?
Education was always a very big aspect in my family. Almost everybody in my family is very, very well read and successful, just from a career perspective of achieving some pretty cool things. So there's almost a little bit of a shaming aspect of it, to like, well, you don't want to be the one that's the dad in the family, so let's get it together here. But the funny part is that I maybe we'll talk about this later as well. I think one of the weirdest points in my life was I actually ended up failing a year of college. And that was definitely a very telling moment in my life. Was a big pivot point. And I think I had a conversation with my father that probably I will never be able to forget, which is telling me the actual story of like my grandfather, and like, the hard work that he did to build up, his reputation and pull himself out of, the situation that he was kind of born into. So it really kind of stuck with me as to having the idea of that you have to have extremely good work ethic, can't take anything for granted, and to be able to put your mind to something and knowing that you can achieve it if you keep up with the idea of consistency. So I think that was a big part of, that year that I ended up kind of screwing up. I didn't think it was a reflection of myself, because I finished off the rest of the year basically with almost 4.0. So I knew I was capable of it. I just had to figure out how to apply myself, and applying those routines of consistency and showing up every day and doing the right things little by little. That 1% did result in the pretty significant improvement later on. So a big part of it was education and the work ethic. So even my time at RIM at BlackBerry, I was working a certain job where basically I'd be working almost like a night shift. I'd work, I think it was like 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And then on Thursday nights at 4 a.m., I'd hop in my car, drive an hour and a half, go to the solar car facility, sleep in sleeping bag under the desk, and then wake up the next morning, work on the car, build it, find a hot shower and a meal, and then make it back home to be back at work on Monday morning. So it's one of those things where I didn't have to go do that, but I found both things to be very fascinating. I couldn't give either of them up, and I knew that if I just sort of kept at it, I think I would have a lot to learn from. And here I am almost 18 years later, still being thankful for those opportunities and the things that it taught me about having good work ethic.
Incredible. Your story on work ethic sounds like Elon Musk. Almost gave me goosebumps, Spondon. So let's talk about the present now. What's your main focus area these days?
So it's really interesting right now taking a look at, I'll say the dreaded two words, AI. While everyone's talking about it, I find it absolutely fascinating. I think my first foray into this space was probably about 3-4 years ago, taking a look at computer vision algorithms and machine learning and recommendation systems. And it kind of felt like, yeah, there's something cool here for sure. And it wasn't until probably late last year, or I guess when GPT 3.5 came out, that I fully could comprehend the scale and magnitude of what we were about to be witnessing. So the advancement of the LLM, not that they're new, but like the pace at which they're moving at is incredible. So I think one of the most fascinating things for me right now is not to make a product that's a wrapper on top of a set of APIs that use AI and LLMs, but to be able to create a cohesive product experience that actually solves a problem by bringing together multiple sides of the technology stack. So be able to bring in computer vision when appropriate, large language models when appropriate, machine learning algorithms when appropriate, and the right amount of front end and back end software to create something that feels cohesive is the thing that's keeping me most excited. And it's been really fun just building with the team at this point, because we're taking a look at completely new user experience flows, user interface designs that haven't historically been the way that humans and computers have interacted with each other. So it's been really fun trying to ideate with, is this absolutely necessary? Do we have to do things this way? And the best part, honestly, this part has been to start with a blank sheet of paper and not feel constrained by the way that things are right now, to be able to be inventive and have a little fun with it along the way.
Wow. And what's your current bet on how you are using AI in real estate to solve pain points for customers?
My current bet is that I think all the large portals will do largely the same things. And I think everything will kind of boil down to incentive models at the end of the day. Almost all the portals are incentivized to have people come back to the portals and have eyeballs on there, so that they could either A, turn into a lead, or B, be advertised to a lead. Those are primarily the two consumer monetization strategies that are out there. So I don't think, unfortunately, too many things change with that part of it. And I think this sort of goes to the concept of the innovator's dilemma, is like, do we stick with this thing that's been super successful and sort of slap on it, add AI on top of it? Or can we actually take the chance at starting with something completely new, even if it means potentially taking away part of the existing business? And I think that's going to be the really interesting storyline to go and watch, is to see which one of the big portals out there is going to actually attempt to eat their own lunch, so to speak, and try to diversify and try something a little bit different. In the meantime, I think there's going to be a lot of upstarts, probably kind of like myself, that are going to be trying new experiments to see what works or not. And one of the coolest things that'll be there on the upside of that is that building has become considerably cheaper from a software perspective than it has been in years. So the pace at which development is happening now is absolutely breathtaking and magnificent. And that's an unfair advantage to some of the smaller competitors and startups that are out there, but it's going to be one that can be realized pretty quickly by the large portals and large capitalized players out there as well. So it sort of becomes an arms race, I think, for the technology development aspect of it. And at the end of the day, if you think about the venture side of the world, they'll always hear the phrase that idea is worth nothing and execution is worth everything. So it sort of boils down to how well you can execute on the vision that you have at the end of the day, and how quickly you can execute on the pivot if you realize that, which I'm always okay to be wrong. I can learn to be.
Yeah, it basically seems like you're mentioning, when you mention the large platforms, you're talking about Zillow, Redfin, EXP, Compass, and the likes of those are primarily incentivized by eyeballs spent on their websites, looking at homes, surfing for homes, checking their home price. And the way they incentivize that by that is they either generate leads for different activities people want to do with their homes, like selling their home or getting it, cashing out of their home or refinancing, or just making ad dollars by showing ads from service providers in similar area. And building has become insanely cheaper, with AI essentially being able to write software by itself. By AI, I mean, essentially the latest software generation tools. So with all these in mind, what product are you focused on these days? What product are you building these days?
So this is super exciting for me, because we're just starting to kind of take the wraps off of this right now. We're still building it. We have a long way to go. So we're creating something called Sherlock Homes, HOMES. It's a little plan where it's been a lot of fun revealing this product and getting the instant reaction from people. And Sherlock I'm pitching as the world's first real estate AI detective. His job is to help uncover hidden insights about properties and about you as the consumer or the buyer of real estate and property. So there's a lot of fun things that we can do with it. But so far we've learned one of the most fun things we've done is we created a little Tinder style quiz where basically in about 30 to 40 seconds, you basically swipe left or swipe right to kind of decide, what kind of taste that you have, what kind of preference that you have. So it's been really interesting watching people's reactions to seeing like, oh, that actually is a fairly good representation of me, or like this part may not make sense. There's a lot of tweaking you got to figure out. But that first realization that like, okay, now I can understand this system is understanding what I want personally and making better recommendation than probably what's out there. So as we're working through the recommendation piece now, people are sort of completing the sentences of what they kind of expect, which is a really nice piece of validation for what we're kind of focused on. And we're trying to get that built out in the next few weeks and months here. So we're getting really close. So it's been really exciting building this product and kind of seeing where we go with it. I think it's I don't know if we're going to fundamentally revolutionize the entire industry, but I think we keep discovering more pain points as we go along, and yeah, we'll see where it goes. But very excited about that right now.
Sherlock Holmes sounds amazing. I finally get it. Yeah. So, what are the main pain points you want to currently try solving with Sherlock Holmes?
So there's a really interesting juxtaposition that I'm seeing here, which feels a little bit unserved. There's people that right now we're targeting the first-time home buyers, and they can fall into a lot of camps. But let's take somebody like renters, for example. Historically, when they're looking at buying a property, they start off, and we saw this, the work that I've done in what EXP and so on and so forth. There's a massive funnel of people that are looking at real estate. And at the other end of the funnel, there's a handful that actually say, I want to talk to an agent. And then there's that connection between the agent and the consumer that's supposed to happen. Agents, unfortunately, I think have really gotten horrible leads historically. And it's one of the pain points as to why they decide, are these worth it? Do we want to pay for them? So on and so forth. So that funnel aspect of it, that starts at, I think, like 110 or 120 million monthly active users of real estate portals, that ends up in, like just tens of millions, maybe less than that, as far as leads that come in on an annual basis. What happens in there is kind of a mystery. No one actually knows who it is. So it's a very indiscriminate set of targeting that happens. So trying to figure out, somebody that's like a high intent person, like a renter that wants to purchase real estate, but may not necessarily know the first thing about real estate. Maybe they want to talk to an agent. Maybe they don't want to talk to an agent. Maybe they want to read some resources. Maybe they don't want to read resources. So it's kind of tricky kind of figure out what it is that they're looking for. But the key thing is that there's always questions. They have questions that they want answers. And this is where I think LLMs are going to be really interesting, because they excel at answering questions in a way that feels much more natural than anything else that's been out there. Now, you can't take that and apply it to every single interface that you can have working with software. So we have to be careful about that. But I think trying to figure out how to better serve the intent of someone learning about real estate and trying to figure out, is this a good thing I need to do? Should I keep renting? Should I keep looking to buying? There's a whole host of decisions that come into there, and a whole set of disparate resources out there right now. So I think what we're trying to focus on right now is, how do we better solve that problem of getting the right consumer in the right place that's more ready to buy and informed by the time they get to the door, and be able to work with an agent and create a better lead flow overall there.
Fascinating. So it seems like the problem you're describing is about 120 million users check these large real estate portals every month, but most of them don't end up becoming a real qualified lead. And there's a massive batch of users who could be real leads but don't really become them due to a whole host of reasons. And what you're building with Sherlock Holmes will try to plug that gap, essentially, by using language learning models and natural generative responses and this massive treasure trove of real estate data to uncover risks and try to solve problems. Is that the right summary?
That's the hope. That's the vision.
That sounds amazing. What is the biggest mistake you see your peers making in this space, others who are also starting to use AI to uncover insights in real estate?
So there's I guess maybe different categories of them. I think the most dangerous one are the ones that want to end everything, destroy everything. The industry is awful and we need to just replace it. Goodbye, agent. I think that's probably one of the worst things that you could do, because I think there is a very fundamental place for agents in the transaction. And in my experience, kind of going through buying and selling property like 3-4 times, they bring a lot of value to the transaction, and it's going to be really hard to replicate that aspect. Yeah, I think this idea of replace the agent with technology is not really going to fly for a long, long time. And I think rushing to any idea and banking your entire product on that is going to be a very, very tricky one to make a sustainable business model in the short term. Maybe something in the long term, there's something there. But I think that's one big one of like, let's go replace everything. The second one, I think, is the opposite of the established players that want to be able to talk about using something like AI and say, now with AI, and slapping on a feature like AI on top of it doesn't necessarily solve a set of problems. So this idea of we will build it into the product and learn from there, I feel like very often that ends up being a bit of a mistake as well. And I think it seems to me the best opportunity there is actually, speaking about the innovators, the best opportunity there seems to be to take a look at what your existing business is, start with a clean sheet of paper, reimagine the experience, and make some trade-offs as to what you're willing to experiment to try with. Because you never know what runaway success you might have starting with something completely new as well. So I think those are the two main things that I see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For a broker listening to this right now that wants to get in touch with you and your team, how should they contact you to figure out more information?
Yeah, I'm always available by email and LinkedIn. Those are the two best options. So the email is going to be spondon@greenivy.io. Hopefully we could put it in the show notes or something like that. If not, the other one would be on LinkedIn. If you search Spondon Hazarika, I think maybe there's two of us, so hopefully you should be able to find me. But I think it's /S Hazarika to find me in there on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive at both of those.
That's amazing. For Green Ivy Ventures, which is seems like your parent company that's building products like Sherlock Holmes, how did you decide to name Green Ivy in the first?
Lessons learned the hard way. In my previous house, because it was the first house that we actually had a lawn, and this idea of I'd never really had a lawn or that kind of stuff growing up, I was really big into the gardening aspect of things, and ended up just trying to rip up a whole bunch of like leaves and weeds and that kind of stuff. And I was pulling a bunch of stuff out, and then started to get itchy, and then realized I had been playing with like a poison ivy like all afternoon. So definitely got a nice set of burns there, and stayed away there from that for a little while. But I actually went back to because I like wanted to get rid of it. And it was this thing where, after I had let it run for a bit, it just had, even after I destroyed it, it came back to life. It climbed up the house. And then when I started ripping it out, I was actually pulling it out from under the ground and ripping up tons of soil on the way. And it actually had gone underground and across to the fence and went to the other one. So it was astounding to me that this thing was so resilient. It looked beautiful from the outside, but I knew I had to get it to go. But it struck me then that this thing that was so beautiful could be so resilient and so hard to get rid of and so stubborn. Like, I was like, that's a great name for a company. That's exactly what I want our identity to be. Is I want to be something that tries a lot of different things and is stubbornly there and trying to figure out the right way to survive and thrive. And, when it does survive and is successful, if you ever seen a trellis full of like ivy, it's actually a beautiful thing to go take a look at. But it takes a long time, it takes a lot of diversification, and it takes a lot of different routes that probably fail along the way. So that seemed like a great inspiration for how I wanted to operate on a day-to-day basis and how it teamed up. That's where the name came from.
Wow. See, is resilient underdog mindset how you define the culture at Green Ivy Ventures and Sherlock Holmes?
I think that's a very big part of it, but I also like to balance it. I'm a big believer in balance. So, one of our big things as well is to find your fun. That's also a cultural value as well, is that, there are going to be some really hard days and some really long days, and you have to find the fun in the humor and all of it as well. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take it. If you take yourself too seriously, it's going to be just a grind all the way to the end. So there's 5 core cultural values, but those are a big part of it. But finding the balance and finding the fun is a big part.
I couldn't agree more. And what strategies and operational frameworks do you use to maximize the productivity from your resources and team members?
So there's, I guess, some operational things that we tend to do, and then some strategy things that we tend to do. I forget what the book was that I read a while back. I think it's called Leadership as Language. And it kind of talked about this concept of red work and blue work. And the idea that the blue work is kind of like the deep thought kind of work that requires intense amounts of focus, not a lot of distraction, while the red work is the kind of like the get the work done and the factory aspect of it. So a big thing that what we preach is, don't set a roadmap that is going to be like 6 to 10 months out, because you don't know what's going to change in the meantime. So try to be more short and deliberate about what you want to get to in like the next week for sure. the next month roughly for sure, get a better idea of that. And beyond that, try to be a bit more aspirational where we think we might want to know in that way. But in order to do that, you have to apply the red work and blue work framework, which is that at the beginning of the week, we spend a good amount of time basically doing like the planning work to kind of figure out what it is that we're trying to kind of do and execute. And that's the blue kind of deep thinking where we'll communicate and contact with each other a little bit more. And then the red work is the actual execution of the work, where if the work is kind of laid out early on, it's more about, boom, 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 just go get those things done. And, connect as you need to solve problems that'll inevitably show up or things that have some amount of disclarity. And at the end of the week, kind of sink in on how things are going and take stock of how far you went along your plan, how much development you actually were successful with. So, that 1 week should give you that, again, that 1%. That 1 week should give you that 1% incremental improvement over last week to be like, we were here last week, now we're here this week, and so on and so forth, until you actually kind of get to the place that you're trying to get to, and you get the customer validation and product market fit that way.
I couldn't agree more. And for your team, as we sit in this era of, the best talent is scattered across the world, but then a lot of employers also want their talent to be, across their eyes twice or thrice a week. Where do you fall in that spectrum of like truly remote versus work from office?
During the pandemic, I threw out almost all of my like work shirts and collared shirts. So by that logic, I'm pretty much remote work from home for the rest of my life. I think maybe at some point that changes. Certain regionalized teams might have more, operational teams may make more sense and stuff like that. But I think there are ways to build very good balanced remote teams as well. So I'm pretty much 100% team remote at this point.
And I'm the same as you. I was forced to build a remote team when I first started building this about 5 years ago, and it was not really cool to build a remote team then. I could, like, when customers asked me, where's your address, I couldn't really explain that my address was my home. But now I think, there are so many advantages to building a truly remote team. It's completely unbelievable. What are the biggest challenges, Brandon, that you're facing in terms of scaling your team or operations?
The biggest challenge at this point is that I think we're choosing to remain bootstrapped. So we're not necessarily going out there looking for massive amounts of funding or anything like that. I think we like to make sure we have a good idea of what we would do with capital that came in from the outside. And that creates other set of challenges as well. It has its place for sure. But I think the big thing right now is sort of constrained by, the current revenue streams that we have coming in, basically from like consulting gigs here and there and a combination of some savings that we've got. So it's more about, taking what we have, being very resourceful with them, and making bets on where do we get that next growth from to be able to fund the growth that we're like. I heard this piece of advice a long time ago, which I think, maybe not for everybody. I think you had a guest, Sam Sawyer, previous to this, about the idea that just because you raised a massive round doesn't necessarily make you a valuable company. And not everything out there is VC fundable as well. So that's a big part of how we kind of think about it, is that I don't think we found necessarily that scale concept just yet. So until we know what we're going to be looking for, bootstrapping it is, and that does keep you very resource constrained and limited. So that's probably the hardest at this point, is that I would love to be able to grow the team and bring on like really awesome superstars that I know that are out there that have reached out like looking for opportunities, but we're just not there yet. And I think, with the team that we have, I'm very thankful for them and what we have right now. It's been a lot of fun, but I think slow and steady wins the race in this case.
Yeah, we are the same. We are bootstrapped as well. We are not raising capital. And, so many of our competitors raise tens of millions of dollars of capital and are completely shut down or sold for cents on the dollar, if even. So yeah, couldn't agree more. As we look at like the zoom out and look at the future of the real estate transaction space and the role of data and AI and analytics and, so many other possibilities that could happen. What's your vision for the ideal customer journey in the future of the real estate transaction industry?
The ideal customer journey. And so I think I'm making a long-term bet here. I think we're going to see the rental generation start to really bite into the home ownership generation. Like, my son is 4. I don't know if he's going to own real estate. I'm going to fully encourage it, but I don't know if it's going to happen necessarily. And there's a multitude of factors that are going to be going into that. So I think, again, this problem of trying to decide between renting and buying is going to be a perpetual one that's going to get to be a bigger and bigger problem, in my opinion. And I think there's a lot of resources out there, and they're not always great necessarily, because I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition of fintech and real estate, right? When you're trying to make a decision about whether you should go and buy something, oftentimes there's this concept of like homeownership is one of the greatest ways to go and generate wealth and so on and so forth. I don't know if that thesis is going to continue to hold true. That whole, what's that, like the thing you put, like when you have a disclosure of a public company that past performance is not an indicator of future performance. I don't know if you want to keep subscribing to that necessarily. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see where that plays out, because I think there's also a shift in how Gen Z is thinking about what they want to spend their money on, where they want to live, how they want to live, who they want to live with, and so on and so forth, how they make decisions about family and life and when they want to start elder. We saw some fascinating statistics at the IOI conference in Chicago 2 weeks ago about how some of those patterns are already changing. And we're going to start, I think, seeing those hit in the market in the next 5 to 10 years. So my hope, to answer your question, is to be able to provide a resource that helps better set people up for success in their life, regardless of which direction they choose, home ownership or rental. In both cases, I'd like to be able to help create wealth, regardless of the path that they choose. And I think both are actually possible if you make the right set of decisions, but it requires a certain set of financial literacy to be able to come into play with your understanding of certain sectors like real estate and how they actually work. So I think that stuff is not very well taught. It's not very well understood by a lot of consumers as well. So to be able to play a role in potentially helping educate and create tools that come along with you on that ride, I think is a big part of how we're thinking about tools like Sherlock and the products that work.
I love it, Spondon. Can I ask you some rapid fire questions? What do you know about the real estate industry that would surprise most people?
I think the thing that would surprise most people is that most agents are actually pretty great. They have a really bad reputation, and I think it's sort of been a byproduct of a few bad actors that have really amplified the brand that's been there. I spent a lot of time with agents, and the vast majority of them are really great at advocating for their clients and are actually really great, honest people, hardworking people that also have families too. So I think one of those things that's really surprising is that agents are actually really awesome in most of the cases. And I'm really hoping that in the next little while here that we actually see, probably a bit of an exodus in the industry. And hopefully it's the ones that we want to keep around that stick around the industry, because they're the fun ones and they're the ones most excited about working with clients and technology and the future of where this all goes. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think most of the pushback comes from people feeling agents are overcompensated, not questioning the value of this service.
Yeah.
Wonder if a family office calls you and says they've just started a liquidity event and they've allocated a lot of money to asset classes, but now they have $100 million left and they want to allocate it to real estate. How would you advise them?
Can they give me the $100 million?
They should. What would you do with that?
Yeah. So I think investing into real estate itself, you say can you invest into real estate classes or no?
Absolutely, across asset classes and real estate.
So I think definitely investing into properties that are going to have high rental yields over the next 20 years is probably going to be a thing that's going to make a lot of sense. I don't see rents ever really going away. People need a place to live. It's one of the most fascinating things about the real estate industry is that housing is pretty much the only necessity that is also an asset class. You don't have that for anything else. Like that's a necessity in life. So I think investing into probably 60% of that into something that's going to be good rental stock and has high yields, I think would make a lot of sense. And I'd say the remaining 30-40% of that, where that 30-40 million, invest into various prop tech initiatives, I think that are going to probably have a high rate of failure. But if you invest appropriately enough, I think some of those could have some really significant upside left to them, with the idea that hopefully your rental portfolio is creating enough of a diversified revenue to account for the failures they probably have on the investment side.
Makes a lot of sense. That looks like a reasonable portfolio. What organization or institution would you fix if you had the time?
I think it'd be really interesting to go back and try to take Google back to the good old days. I think they're in a really interesting situation right now. I think they're doing some awesome stuff, but I think a lot of the luster has sort of been lost as to where they sort of came from with the mantras of don't be evil, all that kind of stuff. I don't know that people necessarily see them in the best light anymore. They've expanded into a lot of places. I think they're seeing a lot of threats from a search perspective, probably with all the stuff that's happening with AI and LLMs. So it'll be really interesting project to try to take on. How do you kind of effectively kind of take on the innovator's dilemma at some place like Google? Generally is pretty good, but I think has probably taken a few steps backwards from where they historically have been, I guess.
And just to double click on that, like what changes would you institute? Let's say if you were running Google for a year.
Oh, if I was running Google for a year, it would be quite the privilege to run Google for a year, I suppose. I think I'd want to understand a lot more about how much has diversified into kind of the moonshot space. That kind of feels like there might be a bit too much going on there, and I think the idea of it'd be great to try to diversify away from the AdSense part of all the revenue. So I would love to go back to more core product building principles there, and try to find things that are again great for the consumer, but don't necessarily monetize the data, and try to get away from that aspect of.
Yeah, I agree. I would personally just fix the culture. I think the whole working lazy culture has become a cancer Google. Not that everybody is lazy, but the de facto way of life there has been just show up for a few hours a day and get paid a large big paycheck just to stay alive. Um, if your loved ones agree to be mentored by you, Spondon, what's the number one skill you would teach them?
I would tell them to draw a lot. It's a very base skill. I'm not saying go make art or anything like that, but to explain a concept, you have to understand it really well. And if you can draw it out on a whiteboard and explain how things are interrelated and how systems work together, I think that puts you a cut above like the vast majority of people that tend to in these industries. So that's actually, I think, maybe our second or third cultural value at Green Ivy is to draw a lot, because a picture tells 1,000 words, and it explains things in ways that just typing it out might lose a lot of context. So to me, whenever I don't understand something, I say, okay, let me just draw it out because I'm not following you, or please draw out a picture. And that works wonders in clearing out miscommunication and understanding what to go do next, and going to the idea of being able to see around corners. Because if you have all the things that are laid out of like, here are all your inputs, here are your outputs, here are the levers you have accessible, you can start to see relationships and kind of build dependencies that you may not have caught if you were just trying to write it down in prose, for example. So I think teaching somebody to draw a lot and draw out systems of their thinking is probably, in my opinion, one of the most underutilized simple skills that could really like career hacking.
Wow, that was very revealing. That was Spondon Hazarika, a resilient underdog who's growing like a green ivy everywhere and will not be stopped. He's the CEO of Green Ivy Ventures and the founder of Sherlock Homes. If you're a broker interested in using or the latest generation of home analysis technology to help your customers, reach out to him on Spondon at greenivy.io, or find him on LinkedIn at S Hazarika. We'll add details to both of these in the description. This is Nick Shah. If you ever want to talk about real estate anytime, shoot me a note on CEO@home.llc. Thanks, everyone.